Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another 1.5 hours of sensibility. I am your host, Jen Jackson, and as always, we have 3 show segments lined up for you today. 2 great guests. We'll be starting it off with LEAP speaker and former prosecutor James Gierach on drugs in the marketplace, and afterwards we will welcome Howard Wooldridge on the Activist Corner. Howard is also known as the Cowboy Cop, and right now he is the voice of citizens opposing prohibition, and he is also all of our voices in the halls of Congress. So that should be very exciting. Afterwards, of course, we will be taking your calls against pros against prohibition, and that is your opportunity to call in, voice your opinion on the topics at hand, the war on drugs in general, or ask a question. I will do my best to answer it to the best of my ability. If I can't, perhaps we will be fortunate enough to have someone in the listening audience who could call in and share their knowledge with us. So without further ado, let's go ahead and move right into our show and welcome James Gierach.
Jim, are you there?
I'm here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's good to be with you, Jen.
Thanks. Now, for our listeners who are not familiar with you or your work, can you give us a little background about yourself?
Well, I'm a practicing attorney in the Chicago area for about 40-some years. I started out as a prosecutor in Cook County and spent a good deal of time prosecuting homicides and murder or homicides and drug cases. And then I was in private practice representing cities, villages, townships, libraries, and handling a variety of civil work. I also was a village prosecutor for many years.
Very nice.
Well, that's professionally. Then drug-wise, I got interested in the issue of drugs because here in Chicago, back in the about 1998, we had 12 kids killed in one weekend, and the violence bothered me so much, and of course much of the violence is because of prohibition, that I decided it was time to become active again with the criminal problems in our society, and that of course means drug prohibition.
I see. And is that when you got involved with LEAP, or did you initially begin pursuing drug law reform through other avenues?
Well, my initial effort was in politics because I was concerned when these kids were killed, then everybody would stand up, Republican and Democrat alike, and say we need to get tough, crack down, send more people to jail, take back our streets, down with dope, up with hope. We built prisons to the point where we couldn't pay for schools. Illinois ended up 50th in the state funding of public education, and yet prisons were the fastest growing housing in the United States during the 1990s because of this drug war at one point. So I ran for state's attorney of Cook County, which is the chief prosecutor's office. I was unsuccessful, unfortunately, but I was championing drug policy reform, taking the profit out of the drug business to stop the violence. 2 years later, I ran for governor of Illinois on the same idea, drug reform platform, no more prison constructions. And I did not succeed in that election, and the state continued to build prisons to the point where we now have some penitentiaries sitting vacant. So the politics was the first effort, and then writing, public speaking.
I see. And I take it as that when you got involved with LEAP, how did you initially hear about LEAP, and did you approach them? Did they approach you?
They approached me. LEAP started in 2002, and it was principally, well, exclusively law enforcement officers, people who had been in the front lines of the war on drugs and who enforced our drug laws. And these police officers could see that that didn't matter how many people you arrested, how many people you put in jail. There were always more people coming to fill the spots of the people that were arrested, shot, or killed because prohibition generates more of the same. It's the rules that we put in place that cause the crises that we can't afford, both in terms of life and health and dollars. So the LEAP, Jack Cole, the executive director at the time, he got hold of me and asked if I would join. And when I heard and saw what they were doing, of course, I enthusiastically said yes, and I've been with them ever since, and now serve on the board of directors. And
that's wonderful. How long has that been now?
2004.
Okay, very good. Now, a lot of people, when, a lot of people are still in support of the war on drugs because they don't quite understand a lot of the spin-off that we get from it. And what I mean by that is a lot of the violence and the other detrimental effects that are a direct cause of the war on drugs. I would like for you to speak about that a little bit and perhaps outline some of those different aspects for listeners who may not be aware or very knowledgeable about this subject.
Well, as a former drug prosecutor, I, of course, am opposed to drug use. I continue to remain opposed to drug use. But people who are opposed because they certainly don't want kids and society generally being intoxicated, they need to realize that the war on drugs has two principal defects. The first one is that it doesn't work. Prohibition is the most effective way to put more drugs of every kind everywhere. Drugs are now, after 40 years of drug war, cheaper, more available, more powerful, more dangerous, and probably worst of all, most easily found on school premises and in parks and places where kids hang out. So if the objective was to save the kids from drugs, the war on drugs has failed mightily. We seize drugs, illicit drugs, by the ton, and we prosecute them by the gram. Now, you don't have to think about that equation too long to realize that it's an unaffordable policy. It simply doesn't work. We get more instead of less as we succeed, because as you increase the price of drugs through an effort to try to prohibit them, you increase the supply, because the greater the price, the greater the supply. 101 economics. So the first defect in the war on drugs is that it doesn't work. Causes what it was designed to prevent. The second problem is the war on drugs not only doesn't work, but it's the heart of nearly any crisis you can name in America. We tell kids don't do drugs, and then we slide a pot of gold next to the choice that we tell them not to take, and we're surprised so many kids, particularly in the inner city, are dropping out of school, joining a gang, getting a gun, shooting the rival gang members as they fight over control of drug turf. Because they're in the drug business, they have no insurance, so when somebody gets a bullet hole through them, this is an uninsured person going to the hospital where, again, public dollars are paying the bills. Sometimes the bullet misses and hits some innocent third party. We can have safe streets or drug prohibition, but we can't have both. So now, because this crime is being committed, we have this not only the turf war crime, but addict crime, people who are addicted to drugs and have no way to access the drug they're addicted to because it's prohibited. They're now left with the only avenue of outlets to get the drug is the corner drug dealer. And he, of course, charges too much because the price of the drugs are artificially inflated because of the prohibition. So now the addict who has to have the drug, he's an addict, needs to go out and commit crime, theft, crime, burglary, home invasion, robbery, prostitution, stealing from their own family, all sorts of horribles. So we have two types of crime caused by the war on drugs, addict crime and turf war crime. And then because we have this crime, when we catch them, we have to put them in prison. So we build prisons to the point where we can't pay for schools because the amount of public financing of government and schools is finite, and when we take $1 from schools and we put it into prisons, well, schools suffer and prisons get bigger. And you can't do anything worse with a public dollar than hire somebody to watch somebody else do nothing. And that's basically what prisons are. So then we have people who are overdosing because they're consuming substances and they don't know what's in them. And the irony of prohibition is that when you prohibit something, you give up the right to regulate or control it. So you can't require a label on heroin that says, don't use this because it's dangerous, but if you decide to use it, don't exceed the recommended dosage, so much per 100 pounds of body weight. You give up the right to control the regulation, the manufacture, the consistency of the product, the purity of the product, the adulteration of the product, the distribution. You can't license or regulate the distribution points with regard to age, location, address, lack of criminal history or background. So that when we prohibit these drugs, it makes it more dangerous for the person using the substance. Result, we have overdose deaths. We in Chicago, where I'm from, we happen to be leading the country in overdose deaths on heroin. We have some heroin cut with fentanyl, which is a legal drug that has the side effect of paralyzing the respiratory system. So we just have a slew of problems. The problem of guns, gangs, crime, prisons, taxes, deficits, AIDS, health care, trade imbalance, corruption, no money for schools, job programs, the funding of terrorism. All of those American crises are made worse by the war on drugs. So back to my outline, the war on drugs has two principal defects. One, it doesn't work, puts more drugs everywhere. Two, it's the heart of nearly any crisis you can name in America.
Oh, and that's huge. I always say when you begin to look at it from all the different angles, it becomes apparent how detrimental it is on so many different levels to our society and to people as individuals.